On the evening of August 8th in 2014, in San Angelo, Texas, Brandon Lawson would storm out of his house full of anger after having a fight with his girlfriend. Brandon, the father of four, would call his father at 11:30 p.m. to let him know he was going to make the 3-hour drive to stay at his house. On his way, he would run out of gas and would make some very disturbing phone calls. When his brother and the police arrived at his vehicle parked on the side of the road, Brandon was nowhere to be found. This is the bizarre disappearance of Brandon Lawson. Brandon grew up in Texas with his two brothers and sister. He enjoyed being in the outdoors, camping, and fishing. When he was a junior in high school, he would start dating Ladessa Lofton, and the two would become high school sweethearts. She would become the stepmother to Brandon's first child from a previous relationship, and the two would go on to have 3 children of their own over the next 10 years. Brandon began a grueling and tiresome job working in the oil fields, which would have him working 60 hours a week. This, along with the newborn at home, was becoming stressful. Brandon turned to meth as his escape. Brandon's brother Kyle remembers on August 7th of 2013, Brandon had asked him if he knew where he could find some of the drugs he was looking for. Brandon didn't return home the night of August 7th. This is what led to the fight Brandon and Ladessa would have the evening of his disappearance on August 8th. Just before midnight, Brandon stormed out of his house, got in his truck, and was headed to his father's house, which was 3 hours away. Ladessa called her brother-in-law to let him know that Brandon's truck didn't have a lot of gas in it and he wasn't going to make it the whole 3-hour drive. She also stated that she left a gas can on the front porch so he could pick it up and get gas for Brandon when he would get stranded. At 11:30 p.m., Brandon called his father, telling him he was driving the 3 hours to stay with him at his home in Crowley, Texas. Brandon's truck would run out of gas an hour later at 12:30 a.m. en route 277. At this time, Brandon called his brother Kyle, telling him that he was being chased out of town by the Mexicans in the neighborhood. Kyle confronted Brandon, asking him if he was high at that moment, but Brandon denied that he was. Kyle left his house with his wife and 4-year-old son to retrieve the gas can so he could go fill up Brandon's stranded truck. Over the next 30 minutes, Brandon and Kyle would exchange a few more phone calls that didn't last more than a few sentences. Brandon would continually hang up the call, and on one of those calls he told his brother that he was bleeding. During this time, Brandon also made a phone call to the police, which was recorded. I will have you listen to the audio so you can get an idea of exactly how Brandon was right before his disappearance.
911 emergency.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. The safer just pushed some guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. Got chasing to the woods. Please hurry.
Okay, now run that by me.
I'm not talking to him. I actually ran into him.
Ah, you ran into him. Okay.
Got the first guy.
Do you need an ambulance?
Yeah, no, I need the cops.
Okay. Is anybody hurt? Hello?
After listening to the phone call, it might give you a little bit of an example of what was going on. At 12:56, a passing trucker saw Brandon's truck parked over the white line, intruding into the driving lane. He called the police to report an abandoned vehicle parked in a dangerous manner to those driving by. At 1:10 a.m., just under 15 minutes later, a police officer arrived to check on the abandoned vehicle, and Brandon's brother Kyle pulled up at the same time. At this time, Kyle and Brandon were on the phone together. Brandon was not at his vehicle but told Kyle that he could see him from where he was. Kyle assumed he was hiding from the officer, so he went up the road and waited for the officer to leave. At this time, Brandon did have an outstanding warrant for his arrest, so this is why he was hiding from the officer. After the officer left, Kyle returned to Brandon's truck but was still unable to locate him, and now his calls are going to voicemail. Kyle waited around 45 minutes, but Brandon never returned. Kyle decided it was time to head back home so his wife and son could get some sleep. Kyle returned at 5 a.m., but Brandon was still nowhere to be found. The only possible evidence that could be found that morning was a spot under a nearby tree that looked like someone was sitting on. Other than that, Brandon had completely vanished. Investigators first believed that Kyle helped his brother get out of town, but was able to pass a polygraph test on the matter, and that theory was later dropped. The search for Brandon began. Investigators used thermal imaging from airplanes, cadaver dogs, and even private investigators with his own team searched for anything to tell them what happened that night, but they all turned up empty-handed. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Brandon that evening. No clues would turn up until February 4th of 2022, almost a decade after Brandon disappeared. Clothing that was identified to be Brandon's was found, and a further search of the area, human remains were found as well. At the time this video was uploaded, the DNA of the remains has not officially been identified as Brandon's, but investigators and family members do believe that it is a good possibility that they are his. So what exactly happened that night? There are two possible theories. One is that Brandon decided to leave on his own will. This is more than likely not the case. Brandon was set to start a new job a little after that fateful night. He had a family and children at home that he loved very much. Even if he was using drugs at that time, it wasn't in a way that was overtaking his life. He had just relapsed, but he wasn't a fiend wandering the streets looking and stealing for his next fix. But were people really chasing Brandon that night? Most people believe he was just paranoid due to the drugs, but besides this, there is really no other explanation. Brandon might have just got involved with the wrong people. The fact that his clothing and possible remains took 10 years to be found seems to point to foul play, especially if they were found around the location that was already searched when he initially disappeared. With what little evidence we know, it's truly hard to say what happened to Brandon on that fateful night. Hopefully one day, some more clues will come forward so his friends and family could finally have some closure. Thanks for watching, and have a good night.